as we heard yesterday and today, all of these problems seem deeply interconnected, and part of what we're trying to do through this session and the rest for today is to sort of surface those connections in the lives of those who are working on these issues, in the policies that their employers, the city, the state, or the academic world enables them to do. And I have to say, my job today is to get out of these three people's way, but I'm an academic, so that's not actually going to happen. But they are deeply woven into the issue of housing and homelessness. We're going to kick that off as a sort of opening to have each of them introduce themselves, starting with Dana Cuff at UCLA, to talk about her approach to these issues, and then we'll get to some specifics, and Mark and Lourdes will then pipe up.
Thanks, Char. My name's Dana Cuff. I'm a professor of architecture and urban design and of urban planning, but my main claim to fame these days is that I'm head of a design research lab called City Lab that's really intended to move from research into social impacts. And so we've written state legislation about housing that I'm very proud of, and we'll talk about later.
Mark?
Good morning. My name is Mark Eichenbaum. I'm the Special Assistant to the Mayor of Houston for Homeless Initiatives. I've been in this role for over a decade, and I've been fortunate enough to work with several different administrations. In my role, I'm creating, guiding, crafting, implementing city policies, getting to work with our 16 council members as well as our mayor, as well as try to unify and coordinate all 17 city departments around our policies and procedures, along with the private sector, 100 different NGOs that work with us on homelessness throughout the community so that we can move the needle and drive impact, transformative impact in reducing homelessness.
Lourdes.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Lourdes Castro Ramirez. Welcome to Los Angeles. And unlike Mark, who's been working for the mayor of Houston for a decade, I've been working for Mayor Karen Bass for a month. And been thrilled and excited to serve as the Chief of Housing and Homelessness for the City of LA for Mayor Karen Bass. Prior to joining the administration, I spent 3.5 years as the secretary of a state agency that was focused on housing, civil rights, and consumer protections. My career really has been in the affordable housing space, having served as the CEO of the San Antonio Housing Authority, spending some time under the Obama administration at HUD, and starting here in LA, I spent 10 years working for the LA City Housing Authority. So I'm happy to be back, very glad to be on this panel. Housing and addressing homelessness, key priorities, not only for Mayor Bass, key priorities for Governor Newsom, and a key priority for our entire country. So appreciate the invitation to be part of this morning's conversation.
Thank you. Before we talk about where we are now, I'd like to do, I'm an historian, so I want to go back in time. Each of you has had a long career on these issues, and I'm curious what you have seen over that time, because you also worked in San Antonio, which you did not mention. I'm very upset by that. But over that time, how has this issue changed so that we get to the present and then can start to talk about what that present looked like and what we need to do in response to it? So start with San Antonio.
Okay, let me fix that. San Antonio. I spent 12 years living in San Antonio, and a great city. And so maybe just on this point about sort of reflecting, from my perspective, reflecting on the homelessness crisis and the housing crisis that we'll be speaking more about. After leaving the Obama administration, I came back to San Antonio, and Mayor Nuremberg, who's the current mayor, this is his last term, asked if I would be willing to serve on a housing policy task force to essentially lead an effort with a number of local leaders to develop a 10-year plan to address the housing affordability issues of the city of LA. He asked for this plan to be put together in 3 months because there was a sense of urgency. And it took about 6 to 9 months for us to go through the entire process. And the reason why we spent so much time was because we were very intentional in terms of community engagement and community input. We developed a robust community engagement process that enabled us to meet with residents from all parts of the city to be part of this effort. Now, just fast forward to the role that I'm in currently, the homelessness crisis in the city of LA is, it's grave, right? We have over 46,000 individuals that are experiencing homelessness on any given night. And Mayor Bass is moving with a sense of urgency, declaring this an emergency, and moving quickly to move people inside. And while the approach is in some ways, similar to what I did in San Antonio in terms of both mayors making housing and homelessness a priority, the manner in which Mayor Bass is addressing this crisis is twofold, right? Addressing the crisis with immediate interventions, including an initiative that she launched shortly after assuming her role as mayor, the Inside Safe initiative, which essentially focuses on individuals that are experiencing homelessness, that live in encampments, working to connect to housing and services. Fast forward, we now have just over 1,900 individuals that have been able to move from encampments into interim housing with supports, and that work continues, right? But beyond, of course, the emergency and showing and demonstrating that we can do this together, city, county, and service providers, we're also being intentional about addressing the lack of housing, which is a primary cause of homelessness. And so as I reflect on the time that I spent in San Antonio, my early 1 month tenure here at the city with Mayor Bass, I think that the conversation at the local level has shifted. At the state level, it's shifted. At the federal level, it's shifted. Housing is a critical priority, a critical policy priority. And I don't think that 10 years ago, we were talking about housing and homelessness the way that we are now. And mayors are leading, they're on the front lines, they're determined to move with a sense of urgency and speed, but also being mindful of understanding the root causes that have led to this crisis and being thoughtful and mindful in terms of the solutions that we put in place.
Mark, before you talk about now, tell me what it was like the first day you walked into that office with that new job title.
I think what's happened is that the issue has evolved. And the issue of homelessness has evolved, and how we respond to homelessness has evolved. And so, cities across the country, it's a learning process, so that responding to homelessness is now a core service. For decades, cities, homelessness not our issue. We'll let nonprofits and faith-based organizations take care of it. We are solely focused on keeping the water running and the trash picked up and the roads paved and those core and first responders. That's our core services. But the reality is homelessness is now a core service that cities have to respond to. And it's a learning process for elected officials to come to terms with that new reality. It's also sometimes a learning process for constituents to understand that too, because sometimes that means you have to pony up more dollars. You have a new issue that is now a core service that cities have to respond to. Where's the revenue to be able to respond to that in an effective way? And so that is also a jolt to the system as well. Homelessness is an affordable housing issue, and there is a housing crisis out there. Listen, housing crisis is different between cities, but I don't know any mayor of a major city that says, we're good on affordable housing. So while LA has it really bad, and I was just in Anchorage yesterday, Alaska, and they have it really bad. There's cities like Houston, yep, we have more apartments and we have a lot more housing, but we still have an affordability crisis as well. I think just as what Lourdes said, the amount of stock of affordable housing you have is going to affect the inflow into homelessness, okay? So the less stock you have, the more inflow you're going to have into homelessness. However, what happens is that people too often say it's affordable, it's a housing crisis and we have no housing, so they shrug their shoulders, they furrow their brow, they throw up their hands, they wave the white flag, any other things I can say, and they say, it feels impossible, we give up. We can't do anything because it's a housing crisis, we have no housing. And so what you do is you build for the future, but you have to act now. You have to triage the issue and get people off the streets today while you're building to help people tomorrow. And I think that's what Mayor Bass, is definitely doing. But so much, the evolution, and when I stepped into that office, is that we were so focused on managing the issue. This is what a lot of cities have been doing. Some continue to do it today, and most have already made that transition. But we were spending tens of millions of dollars on the issue, and all we were getting in return was anecdotal stories of success. We weren't moving the needle. And so the mayor at the time said, why are we spending all this money and not getting any impact? And we realized it's not that we were doing anything wrong, it's just we weren't focused on one thing, and that one thing has to be impact, impact, impact. And so there's lots of great projects out there, there's lots of great organizations out there, but that's not good enough for the investment of our very finite funds that we have. And so we are going to we're going to take a private sector principle here, we're going to look at ROI. And we're going to invest, I said not to use acronyms, I hope a return on investment. So we're going to, wherever we can get the biggest bang for the buck. And so that might be, and once again, I mean, this gets difficult. We have very little money. Our issue may be smaller now in Houston than a lot of West Coast cities, but unlike West Coast cities, we have zero financial resources to utilize. And so there could be a great project to help out children, be a great project to help out families. But when 90% of the folks on the streets are single individuals, primarily of color, then that's where we have to hone in on those projects to really drive and get that impact. And the last thing I'll add, which I think the previous panel up here, was coordination and collaboration. I mean, and that's one thing that has evolved over time in Houston, and now it's just inherent in our DNA.
Great, thank you. For those of you who are not in Los Angeles, UCLA is one of the best public-facing institutions, not only in this town, but I think in the country. We have with us Dana Cuff, who has really sort of helped shape the focus of an institution so that she can then shape the policies on the ground. So I'll pitch her book, Architectures of Spatial Justice, and I want you to talk about that in a moment. But you didn't start there. So how do you get to City Lab?
Well, I actually started in Houston, working in public housing there.
This is all I-10 people here, so
Yeah,
you know.
Right. I never get off the 10. I'm just heading for Florida next, I think. You know, I kind of want to go back to your first question about history, though, which ties to what Mayor Ragosa was saying earlier. And if you look back at the history of the housing crisis
Yes.
in the United States, maybe the first time we effectively dealt with the housing crisis was at the turn of the century with tenement law. And we really transformed, not enough, it's never enough, but that doesn't mean that what you've done hasn't been really worthwhile. The way immigrant life was happening inside an invisible problem by really changing policy, especially around the built environment, bringing light and air and fire egress, ways of exiting safely. And that had a transformative effect not only on people's lives, but on their health, on the city. The next really clear crisis that we dealt with was the Depression, when a third of the nation was famously ill-housed, ill-clothed, ill-fed. And that generated our public housing program. Okay, we didn't build enough. We built 1 million units. So did Sweden. So, you know, maybe that's an indication that we could have done, I don't know, 100 times more. But in any case, we built it. And we have that resource still. And now I think what we have in front of us is that next crisis, maybe the third one of that kind of scale, because like Mark says, it's in every city. And it's not just in every city in the United States, in every city globally. So I started in Houston working in public housing there with a tenants organization, spent a lot of time trying to save their biggest housing project, and realized that we really had a social justice problem. All of that, of course, made all the more significant through George Floyd's murder, and all of us becoming so aware of what was invisible in our own era to some of us, of what was going on in the inequities, that social justice is also a form of spatial justice, like where people live, how they live, what their resources are, is unfair. You know, when your zip code determines your lifespan, we know, or your education level, we know that that's inequitable. So how do we begin to address that? And I have to say, I'm super happy to be in California right now working on housing issues because, you know, in Los Angeles, in California, we have a willing legislature. I'm not sure if we have a ton of money. It never feels like that, especially at the University of California. But we have will. And we have a legislature that's willing to pass legislation. There's an urgency about it. We have a mayor who's working on this. And if there's a time when we can respond to this crisis, it will be now and it will be here. So, you know, all of us are working in our own trenches. We need to get together as Lourdes's leadership and Mayor Bass's leadership to make that a really coordinated effort with our new legislation and funding to make more affordable housing more equitably distributed.
So let's go to your trench and tell us about City Lab and how it is for you and your students and colleagues sort of working on these issues that not many academic institutions are as drilled down into and engaged with.
UCLA a few years back decided it was going to be the University of Social Impact, which was perfect for me. I'd been there for quite a while already. But being an architect, you know, we're associated with white privilege pretty thoroughly. So I feel like my job at home in my trench is to bring a kind of justice lens and activist strategy to everything we do. So City Lab became a way for me to turn research, which I really began like figuring out how to do at Allen Parkway Village in Houston, how to make it so that design research led to action that had real impacts. And I'm super proud of that demonstration. We started in 2006 as a result of Hurricane Katrina. Somehow the 10, again, still ties us together, meaning that there was a huge geographic disaster without real architectural response. Like, I felt that same way at the Sylmar earthquake. Like, we're the physical environment people. Why aren't we out there with shovels and legislation and strategies? How come we're not building housing back where there was destruction that would give more back after the disaster than we had before? So we started trying to figure out how to do that, and we started by looking for underutilized land. One way we could maybe think about the built environment becoming a solution in the housing crisis, housing being an architectural focus, was in everybody's backyards. And when you went to the neighborhoods of Los Angeles, especially the neighborhoods of color, they were already doing it. There was a vernacular solution that was coming up, garage apartments, a DIY building in the back that would help support the family's income. There was lots of research about it, historical, around Los Angeles. We found that in some neighborhoods, 2/3 of the housing already had an informal secondary unit. That's pretty impressive. That means it's probably a good solution. So we then started studying what that might look like if we tried to build you know, a new kind of constituency for people who weren't quite here yet. I think that's one of the justice lenses that I try to bring to the work we do, which is those of us who are already here can't pull up the ladder. We hear that all the time, but how do we represent the constituents that aren't here yet, the people who can't afford to be here? So in the backyards, turns out there's no standard backyard in LA, even though everybody in planning will tell you there's a 50 by 150 foot lot. You can hardly find those. Yeah, so people nodding. So we started studying the backyards and the lot types. In the end, we're able to figure out what kind of legislation, after doing a lot of design testing, might actually open up the dikes for being able to build secondary units. And I co-authored legislation that passed in 2015 to make it so we could double the density in the state of California. We tried to do that here in LA, but the political winds were constantly shifting. Our city council sometimes suffers from loud constituents that are here already and not the people who
So
aren't here.
unusual.
Yeah, right. But our state legislature made it possible to open the floodgates, and now we have so many secondary units. And that's kind of a model of what City Lab tries to do. Go from design testing, design research, to impacts. And by my estimate, there's 8 million backyards in the state of California that could have a secondary unit. That would be a housing solution.
Great, thank you. But as you say, that took time to sort of develop those ideas. And Mark, one of the things you just said was that we don't have time. We need to act. So tell me about some of the actions that you and the City of Houston, that you're pushing the City of Houston to sort of pursue, and in what ways?
So, it was always somewhat relatively possible to find one-bedroom units in Houston. Although it's always difficult because you not only have to have a unit, but because we use only federal funds, it has to be all bills paid. And then they have to be willing to take a voucher, and then they have to be willing to take our client with challenging backgrounds. And it can be like a needle in a haystack. But we could do it when we were around 90, 91% occupancy levels. But during COVID, when we went up, our occupancy rates went up 400 basis points. Then finally, we were getting a little taste that the West Coast has been dealing with, of it being really challenging to actually find the unit. You have to have money to pay the rent, money to pay the services, and you have to have the physical unit. That is the trifecta that it takes to house somebody experiencing homelessness. And in Houston, we always seem to have two of the three, and it's a game of whack-a-mole. But this was the first time ever that the issue was we had the money for the rent, we had money for the services, but we didn't have the actual units. So we started having, on a weekly basis, one-bedroom, barrier-busting meetings. Because what happens so often is even my housing department will say, well, the homeless system needs to figure that out. And then the homeless system says, we don't do development. You city, you need to figure that out. And we're all pointing fingers. And the answer is no. We all collectively have to see each other as barrier busters. And we are going to throw wet spaghetti against the wall, hoping some strand sticks to drive impact. So what worked for us was that the city and the county jointly funded a landlord liaison team. And that landlord liaison team at outside nonprofit entities' sole job was to go knock on doors, to cold call. They're using real estate tools to look at vacancy rates at different places and different classifications of property. And they are out there pounding the pavement, trying to get those units. Same time, the mayor's having discussions with major developers. Our economic development office is opening up their Rolodex and having meetings. I'm having meetings. We're doing whatever it takes to try to get those units. Now, to make the landlord liaison team successful, they needed a very important tool. And that tool is an incentive fee to offer. So if you're a landlord and you got a unit available, and there is somebody standing behind our client with cash, and probably not as a challenging background, why would you lease to our client? Well, we are going to sweeten the pot. And so this is the principle where you buy yourself into the market. And it doesn't matter how competitive or strained your housing market is. Fair market principles mean that you can buy into that market. So in Houston, we offer sometimes $1,100, sometimes we offer $1,600. As an incentive to that landlord to lease to our client. Other places, I think it was Santa Barbara on the West Coast, they offer $5,500, okay? So the question is, by market, what is the amount to get that spigot loose to get landlords to start leasing to your clients instead of other folks? And so that's two-prong approach. having a dedicated landlord liaison team, and then having these incentive fees. Now, you might be saying, man, those fees sound really expensive. Who knows how high it could be? But the reality is they're a heck of a lot less expensive than building from the ground up and having to wait 3 years for maybe that to happen. It's a heck of a lot expensive than keeping people on the streets. Most cases, it's less expensive than shelter cost. And so at the end of the day, even though it might seem shocking that we're doing this incentive fee on top of a non-refundable security deposit, on top of a supplemental property damage insurance pool, but the reality is it's still less expensive and financially conservative to provide that fee when you're trying to deal with the social issue.
So you mentioned collaborative, sort of pulling people together in a way that had not happened before. And one of the issues that we've been talking here for the last day has been the sort of verticalness of many of these issues. And so state, federal, local, all have had sometimes competing issues. Fortunately, Lourdes has worked at all three levels, so she has the answer. But I would love to know sort of that piece, right? You've worked at all three entities. You've seen these issues from HUD down to now Los Angeles and San Antonio. Where's and how does the collaborative energy work?
Yeah, excellent. And, Mark touched upon this also at the beginning in terms of the Houston approach being very coordinated and collaborative. And it's on the issues of housing and homelessness, collaboration, coordination, and also accountability, right, between the federal, the state, and the local, critically important. We saw that firsthand just a few weeks ago with the I-10 freeway. There was a fire along the I-10 freeway that basically shut the I-10 freeway down for what we thought would be months. And Mayor Bass moved with a sense of urgency, followed up with the federal government, followed up with the state. The Governor Newsom, within a day, was down here in LA, moving Caltrans to quickly assess the damage. And within a matter of 4 days, that I-10 freeway was back up, right? That level of coordination, federal, state, local, critically important to how we address housing and homelessness. And I would say that that's the level of coordination that has enabled us to call attention to these issues in a way that we have never done before. Mayor Bass is very focused on improving the internal coordination and the internal meaning to the city, right? Housing and homelessness is not just a function of service providers and housing providers. It is also a function of economic development. It's also related to education. All hands on deck, right? And so we're working within the city structure to ensure that we're thinking creatively and with a sense of urgency, and also with a sense of commitment to removing some of the bureaucratic barriers that over time have prevented us from moving more quickly to produce more units. As an example, day one, Mayor Bass declared a state of emergency on homelessness. That has enabled her to issue a number of executive directives. The first executive directive that she issued was focused on streamlining and speeding up the approval process for 100% affordable housing developments. Fast forward, 9,000 units as of yesterday. The mayor had a press conference sharing her one-year results. 9,000 units have been able to go through this streamlined, expedited process, and will be moving into this next phase of getting them into the pipeline, right? Again, moving with urgency. Executive Directive 3 focused on the use of city lands and unlocking the potential of city-owned lands that can be also used to build more housing. That executive directive led Metro LA to also take a look at all of their properties, and they've identified over 120 properties that they believe can be unlocked for housing, about 4,000 units, and so we're working with Metro LA. So again, I think that addressing homelessness and housing is an all of government. It requires all of government, from the federal to the state to the local. But it also, I think Mark articulated very well the importance of the private sector. And, having spent time with the Housing Authority and running the Section 8 housing voucher program, the private sector is very involved in housing through the Section 8 voucher program, right? We cannot provide assistance to a family that's eligible for Section 8 without having the participation of private property owners. But we have to do more, right? So we have to also think about what other role can the private sector play in sort of locking arms, as the mayor says, with the public sector as we look at removing barriers, as we look at collaborating and coordinating across, and as we begin to hold ourselves a little more accountable for the outcomes that we're producing. Because it's, we're looking at the process, but we're staying very focused on the outcome being more people having affordable places to call home.
So how do we do that accountability piece? And before you answer, I would just want to let the audience know in about 5 minutes or so, we'll go to Q&A. So if you've got questions, please get them in your head. So tell me, what are those steps that gives the mayor, the city council, and most of all, the constituencies, a sense that actually this is happening?
Yeah, I think accountability is very important, and 3 points on this. First, I think it is important to recognize, and this is not just unique to LA, I think this is across the state, and in some cases maybe across the country, right? People are very frustrated and maybe have lost a sense that government can move fast and quick to address encampments, to address the fact that we have so many people that are unhoused and living on the streets. And so there's a sense that government is ineffective. You have not been able to address this issue. And we do not want to throw more money into addressing this issue. But the fact of the matter is that we need more money. To address that concern, we have to be able to demonstrate that government can and knows how to address this issue. And so it requires not only the level of coordination and collaboration that we've discussed, but it also requires for us to have very honest conversations about the things that are not working. It requires us to have data in terms of the number of people that are coming in through the coordinated entry system, and which is the system that we use to track individuals that are unhoused. And when Mayor Bass stepped into office, asking the question about data, understanding who's in this homelessness response system, what are the outcomes that we're achieving, and the mayor says this very clearly, she was not able to get a straight answer. And so the last year has been about ensuring that we are sharing data information between the various entities that are responsible for moving the needle on this effort: the Housing Authority, the Housing Department, the LA Homelessness Services Authority, and also the county. And so gathering and sharing information and pushing each other to ensure that in this process of responding to homelessness, that we're holding each other accountable for the things that are working and the things that are not working. Example, because this is, I was very general, but an example. A year ago, the Housing Authority was at about a 20% lease-up rate with their emergency housing vouchers. And these are vouchers that are specifically designed for individuals that are unhoused to be able to quickly move into housing. The mayor made it very clear that the Housing Authority needed to come up with a plan to maximize those federal resources. Fast forward, we're now at about 92% lease-up rate. What did it take? Weekly meetings with the Housing Authority to look at lease-up data between the mayor's office and the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority also hired 12 dedicated staff members. The Housing Authority also began meeting with the LA Homelessness Services Authority to look at the referral process. And the Housing Authority also hired navigators, housing navigators. Now, should they have been doing this all along? Yes. But leadership matters, right? When you have a leader that is moving with urgency and compassion and also expecting for you to do what you're supposed to be doing, sometimes it requires this level of weekly meetings, show me the data, what are you doing, until we get to a point where there's the level of trust, and until we get to a point where this becomes part of the way that the institution responds to this issue.
Great. So, Mark, you talked about the initiatives that Houston has taken to sort of unlock and incentivize landlords to open up to others. Is there another tool that you're utilizing to solve what you're describing?
I mean, look, we're trying to build affordable housing that's a long-term play.
Right.
Okay. And we don't have enough time nor money for just developing from the ground up to solve the issue.
Right.
We're going to, in a city that's light on resources to incentivize a lot of the development, we're going to roll out the red carpet as much as we can in streamlining permitting, any other issues at the city. Our economic development office has a liaison that will just work with developers of affordable housing to try to make the process as least painful as possible. But I have to add, Houston, we've permanently housed over 30,000 individuals in just over the past decade, with 90% staying housed for the long term. And it's housing with services. You'll never house somebody without services. It would be very negligent to do so. The housing is what makes the services work, and the services is what keeps the person housed. But Mayor Turner would say, it's kind of the old adage, if a tree falls in the forest, I'm going to butcher this. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it make a sound? And Mayor Turner believes if we house somebody who's homeless, but the public doesn't know about it, doesn't count.
Work. Yeah.
And so we started saying we have to make a very visible, perceived difference. And so if I went to a community meeting and I said, we housed 5,000 people last year, I would probably get tarred and feathered. Because they would say, I see with my eyes these encampments. So don't tell, and I don't believe data, so you must be lying. So what we started doing is we said, look, if we're going to take this ARPA funds and we're going to invest into homeless housing, we have to respond to encampments. And, thus far, it's been amazing to see LA, even enhance it and take it even to a higher scale. In Houston, we've decommissioned 114 encampments consisting of over 750 individuals, with nearly 90% moving onto the path to being housed. But now people believe that housing's the answer. Now people believe we're actually housing people, because they see it with their own eyes. And the accountability always starts top down. But who is over the top? It's the constituents. The constituents is over that mayor. And so for the constituents to feel it, see it, believe it, has been huge. I'll have private sector folks call me and say, where'd that encampment go? Are they in jail? No. Are they down the street? No. Well, where'd they go? I go to their house. I say, who can we write a check to? So, and I have to add, this notion of collaboration. We always talk about, everybody has to be in sync, rowing together. But the mayor of Winnipeg visited us, and he enhanced it to another level. He said everybody's in a canoe, and everybody is going in different directions. Everybody needs to be in a dragon boat. And everybody needs to be rowing in sync, not just local government, not just council, not just your departments, not just the city and county, but once you get your own house in order, then you put pressure on the homeless system to get in sync as well. But everybody, but also there's seats on that dragon boat for the private sector. My salary was first paid for by Chevron. We're getting donations from the United Arab Emirates. We're getting donations from other countries. We are management districts or PIDs or PUDs or whatever you might have, or contributing to it as well. But every dragon boat has the person who's keeping everybody in sync, who's hitting that drum. In a lot of cases, it has to be the mayor. But it cannot live and die with the mayor. And so whether the mayor gets replaced with the private sector leaders who are the ones hitting that drum, making sure everybody's in sync, or other ones, but it does take everybody to be collectively working together, or else it's like having a leaky faucet in your house, wondering why your water bill's so high. Because you've had a leaky faucet for years and you haven't fixed it. You can't have anybody going rogue. You have to have everybody going in the same direction to maximize those finite resources.